Welcome everybody to our 2015 Executive Recap. This is our unofficial recap of all the events from the Staffing Industry Executive Forum that was in Orlando, Florida. This year, we were really lucky to have 4 people from Team Haley at the Executive Forum, myself, Brad Smith, Ryan Marr, Brad Biley, all attending sessions, listening to some incredible speakers, getting to network with our clients and staffing industry leaders ranging from very small startups to CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies, and really learning a lot about the trends, issues, and directions of the industry. So over the course of the next hour, we are going to do our best to try to share as much of what we learned at this year's Executive Forum with you as we can. And as always, please feel free to use the question window to ask us questions. We'll fill in the blanks where we can. And if you're amongst our attendees who loves Twitter, don't forget that we'll be live tweeting through the whole event, and you can use the hashtag #LunchWithHaley to chat with our team during today's event. All right, so what are we going to cover over the next hour? Well, the agenda is as follows. First, just a few highlights, some of the things you may or may not know about the Executive Forum, and if you've never been there, some of the things that you might want to think about in consideration for going next year when it's in Arizona. We are going to do a recap of the keynote sessions. I think we had at least one person at all of the different keynotes. We'll then talk about some of the breakouts. Unfortunately, we can't even begin to do the breakouts justice. The Executive Forum was 3 days of incredible content. It is a long day. I mean, literally it's 7:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. But we'll cover some of the highlights of the sessions that we attended. And then we're going to wrap things up with some of the take-home lessons that we learned. And finally, if we're able to talk fast enough, there'll be a little time for Q&A. But again, don't be shy. If you've got questions throughout the session, submit them, and we'll do our best to work them into the conversation. All right, with that said, let's jump right in and talk about some of the highlights. First and foremost, this was the biggest executive forum ever, with almost 700 staffing industry executives registered to attend, probably another 300 or 400 industry partners at the event, well over 1,000 people in total at this executive forum. And for those of you who have never been, the executive forum used to be a relatively small event. At one point they limited it to 10 vendors. Now it is one of the 2 biggest events in the industry, and in terms of content, it is absolutely exceptional. And one of the changes that's been happening is we are seeing many more small to mid-sized firms attending, which is great because historically the content was more geared towards larger staffing organizations, and as we're seeing more attendees of small to mid-sized firms, we're seeing more content geared for that audience, which is terrific because most of our clients are in that audience. I will say, though, when you talk about content, I mentioned long days. These are literally 12-hour days, and that's before you join a client or a prospect or another industry partner for dinner. So you come out just loaded with ideas. Usually we warn one another not to bring home too many ideas and try to change everything at once, but try to pick the highlights. And in fact, one of the keynote speakers you'll hear from in a minute had some great suggestions on how to make the most of events like this. The theme this year overall, I would have to say, was probably on innovation, and innovation in the industry and the need for innovation because of the changes that are occurring in the labor market. And you're going to sort of see that as a recurring theme. And I say sort of because several of the keynote speakers brought up that theme of innovation, and it was prevalent in a lot of the breakouts. So we're not specifically going to address innovation that much except for one keynote. But as you're thinking about your business, take this advice and think about how can we create innovative new ways to service clients and particularly candidates to help provide better service to the employers that we work with. There were a lot of new sessions this time, new formats, and one of the ones that I found to be the most fascinating is staffing industry analysts invited in some people that they probably wouldn't describe it this way, but I say that they literally hate the staffing industry. They were true opponents. These are people who are on top of soapboxes online railing against our industry, and they got up and did a presentation, and it was really interesting. We'll share a lot of the feedback, and I think they have some very legitimate gripes that we can all learn from. And this is one of the surprise lessons for all of us is the Affordable Care Act. While no one loves it, for most of the clients we talk to and many of the other business owners we talk to, it's been more of a blessing than a curse. It's helped with business development. It's allowed margins to be improved, prices to be raised, and there are fewer people taking advantage of the insurance than most people expected, so the costs are lower than anticipated. So I know we're just getting started, and I know the reporting requirements are a headache for everybody, but so far the general feedback for the executive forum was so far so good. And of course, no bias here, but the best marketing panel ever. I was very privileged to be invited to be amongst a panel of industry professionals talking about marketing, and we'll do a review of that session in particular later on. Speaking of the sessions, let's jump right in, and let's start off with the keynotes. So I will get things kicked off by recapping one of my favorite events, which is where Barry Asen, the president of Staffing Industry Analysts, does his annual State of the Union, where he recaps what's going on in the industry. And this year he titled his presentation, "Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Staffing Is Wrong." And then he had a lot of fun kind of playing with that phrase, but to really kind of highlight the fact that we have a lot of preconceptions, even those of us who work in the industry every day, and it's not that really everything we know is wrong, but there are some things that we take for granted that might not quite be as accurate as we think. So, number one is first preconception. The staffing industry is just about staffing. At Staffing Industry Analysts, they're really seeing a transition in our industry away from just staffing and towards a concept they referred to as total talent management or total workforce management. Tier 1 of that has been temporary staffing, the way we're used to providing it. Tier 2 is services that are more about talent engagement, the MSP, RPO, and even online staffing. And Tier 3 is kind of the future, which is the outsourced talent solutions. One of the surprising figures that Barry shared was that the total contingent work market in the world is at $3.2 trillion. Yet the staffing industry, as we think about it, is only about $400 million out of that $3.2 trillion. If you account freelancers and online staffing and other types of independent contractor relationships, we're barely scratching the surface of flexible staffing, and the staffing industry has the opportunity to become about much more than staffing as we have historically thought about it. Which ties us to the second point. The staffing industry is all about flexible work. And again, Barry's point was, well, yes and no. It's really about talent management, which integrates flexible work, non-employee labor, things like outsourcing, offshoring, and traditional employees, and the role that staffing firms can play in helping to manage all types of work. This one surprised me. The general belief is that the staffing industry is a high-growth industry, and I was a little disappointed to hear Barry say, no, it's not. It's really a cyclical business. We tend to have big peaks and valleys. Currently, we're back near the year 2000 peak penetration as a percentage of the workforce, but there, as everybody on today's call knows, there have been ups and downs. The big down in 2009 and very fast growth the last few years. We're going to continue to see ups and downs, but historically, we're really not a fast growth industry. Another one is that professional staffing is better than commercial staffing. You've got lower workers' comp risk, kind of less headaches in theory to deal with. But what was, again, a bit of a surprise to me is that industrial staffing remains the largest segment in terms of revenue and the number of people at 29% of the industry as a whole. IT, which has been growing steadily, is number 2 at 24%, and clerical is third at 17%. So professional is not better than commercial, just a little different. Another one, VMS has ruined the staffing industry. It's interesting because staffing industry analyst perception is, the numbers they showed, is that 80% of staffing purchases, large buyers, now go through a VMS. But for most of our clients, most small to mid-sized staffing companies, it's not true. It's a very small percentage that are going through VMS, and VMS hasn't ruined the industry, but they are changing the way a lot of staffing companies provide service, and they are requiring us to become more diligent about and efficient in how we run our business. which is interesting is because when we get to the innovation presentation, our need to be efficient kind of flies in the face of our need to be innovative. Number 6, technology-driven change is largely over. That most of staffing technology that we're going to need has been invented. Boy, that couldn't be further from the truth. If you look at the explosive growth of what they refer to as the human cloud, online staffing, crowdsourcing, and other online services, they are growing at phenomenal rates, and technology is really just starting to take hold of what it might become in the staffing industry as a recruiting tool and as a fulfillment tool. Next up, number 7, staffing firms need to have recruiters. So for anybody on today's call, Barry's point was that may not be true. In fact, 46% of all new hires fail within the first 18 months. So as recruiters, are we doing all we can to ensure the success of our clients? The concern is that if we can't outperform corporate recruiters and show that we can provide people who last a lot longer, we may see that big data and automation are going to come in and revolutionize the way both work gets done and the way talent gets selected. And in the coming years, we may see recruiters as one job title that runs the risk of being automated. Don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger on that one. All right, number 8, kind of a historical belief. In staffing, relationships are king. Relationships trump data, evidence, and best practices. And clearly, all of you know, yes, relationships are important, but long gone are the days of delivering donuts. Today, it's about process, proven performance, and professionalism. And for a lot of smaller staffing firms, that creates a challenge of how do I create those metrics? How do I demonstrate those metrics? How do I show my clients that my metrics are better than the competition? It's not going to all be about relationships. Yes, they're going to remain important, but it's going to be more about having an awesome staffing process as we get further into the future. Next kind of core belief in our industry is that staffing success is all about sales. Well, that is a yes and no. In the current cycle with the increasing skill shortages, it's really more about your ability to recruit, to find talent. It's more about sourcing and selection. And this is the one that we love when Barry puts up, because the median staffing firm marketing spend has increased. We were very excited. It's gone from 0.4% of sales to 0.46% of sales. As an industry, we grossly underspend on marketing, which is why staffing success has been all about sales. But as people get more used to buying online and not dealing with a live human, marketing and your online presence is going to become more critical to staffing success than just your sales function. Another common belief is that all the niche markets in staffing are already taken, and if a market was big enough to serve, that there would already be many staffing firms serving it. Well, Barry said this really isn't true, because if you look at all of the new careers that are being created, every one of those new careers creates new staffing opportunities. And there's a lot of staffing companies now that exist in markets that didn't even exist 4 and 5 years ago, because they're filling job titles that didn't exist. So if you're looking for new opportunities in your business, look to those leading edge markets in energy, in technology, in marketing and creative services, in the industries you already serve, and the new jobs that are being created, and get out in front of that hiring. And misconception number 11, buyers only care about price. Well, according to the data that staffing industry analysts did, price was important, but it's so much more about worker quality. And the reason price becomes such a big issue is we as an industry don't do a good enough job of demonstrating our ability to provide better worker quality than the competitive staffing firms or than HR can do on their own. So if I see all staffing firms as being the same in quality, then it does become about price. And the last one, ACA is negative for the industry. And as I mentioned, so far it's gone pretty well. Most clients have been open to price increases, and participation has been lower than estimated. So far, so good. So that's kind of the baker's dozen of things you thought about staffing that you thought that may have been a little bit different than your preconceived notions. Barry wrapped up his presentation by presenting the 2015 outlook for the industry. And the overall industry growth forecast for this year is 6%, and you can see on screen now the forecasted growth in all the other niche markets. The interesting one to me was some of the smaller markets in marketing and creative and education are actually the ones expected to grow the fastest, and also that travel nursing is forecasted to outperform healthcare as a whole. And for all of you in clerical staffing, I think everybody knows no big boom here expected. So if you want to grow more than 2%, you have to figure out how to take business away from the competition. All right, and that wraps up Barry's presentation. So now we're going to move on to another keynote, and I'm going to take this one too, guys. Gary Hamel, who is the head of a company called the Management Lab, and he's part of the London Business School, and he talked about innovation from everyone, every day. Some really fascinating data here. In almost every industry, there are now insurgent companies that are disrupting the big incumbents. And if you think about it, the incumbents have such advantage. They've got capital. They've got industry knowledge. They've got incredible depth of resources. But then companies pop up like an Uber that steps into the taxi cab business, creates a new business model, and completely disrupts it and throws out the insurgents. There was a chart that Gary presented that showed the companies 5 years ago who were the world's most innovative and the companies today who are the world's most innovative, and over, excuse me, that was between 2010 and 2014, just 4 years, only 2 companies remained on the top 10 list, Apple and Google. Everybody else that was the most innovative was gone, displaced by a new incumbent, excuse me, by a new insurgent to the industry. In terms of driving innovation, Gary's point was that innovation is your only insurance against irrelevance. And he talked about 2 ways to drive innovation. Changing your product, where you try to go from being a commodity to solving problems for clients, to actually using your services to help your clients gain a competitive advantage. And if you're going to innovate, you have to move up that value chain. Right now, most staffing firms are in the filling order commodity, particularly when demand for talent is high. Solution is getting it out in front of that demand. How do we help clients solve business problems? And then creating a competitive advantage is how are we truly partnering with clients to help them run their business more profitably to dominate their market or their industry. Those are the changes we need to make in our products as staffing firms. The other thing to look at is your internal capabilities. How do you change them from being average, we're as good as the best players in our local market, which is how I would define average, to being distinctive. We've got a team of people who really stand out from the local competition to the point where you are truly peerless. We've got processes. We've got knowledge. We've got some other capabilities that there is no other firm that can match. And if you're a follower of Jim Collins and you believe in his hedgehog principle from the book Good to Great, you want to figure out what can we be the best in the world at? And that's a challenge for everybody on today's call, is to ask your staff, what can we be the absolute best in the world at? How do we become peerless in the type of staffing we do, or the way we approach staffing, or the kinds of people we place? And I know most staffing firms' goal is to be a partner in their client's success. And Gary defined a partner as a firm that provides peerless capabilities to deliver the client a competitive advantage. How can you do that in your firm? As I mentioned, only 2 of the world's top 10 most innovative firms in 2010 were still the most innovative in 2014. Innovation is something you do all the time. The problem with the way we run the staffing business, and particularly the way our clients run their businesses, corporate America is focused on efficiency, not innovation. It's about budgets and driving costs down and improving productivity. That is about process improvement. But that doesn't drive innovation. And Gary's point was, if you want to become a more innovative company, you have to change your management. You have to do several things. Number one, you have to create an environment of aspiration, a giant big challenge that gets people excited and gives them a mission to focus on. So you have to inspire them with something, and that might be your aspiration for what can we be the best at the world at delivering. Define that. That becomes your aspiration. Then you have to give people inspiration, which is to give them input, creative resources so that they can see other people to be inspired by. It may be by looking at other companies that are inspirational. It may be by looking at leaders who are inspirational. It may be simply by being a contrarian and taking on the preconceived notions of the staffing industry. But you are looking to find things that inspire your people to constantly seek out new ideas, and then you have to create a culture where experimentation is allowed, where you foster ideas. You use ideas to create experiments that you quickly test, successful experiments you run as pilot projects. Once they prove themselves viable, then you create new products and services based on the successful projects. Those winners become your future revenues. Gary talked about Amazon, and he said their mission isn't to be the best at fulfillment, run the biggest warehouses, it's to be the world's biggest laboratory. They've created an organization that supports the processes that foster innovation. And what that means is, innovation doesn't come from budgets and regular meetings. Innovation comes from processes like inspiring, dreaming, brainstorming, research, things that don't immediately drive revenue. And if you want to foster innovation, you have to make innovation a key topic in your management discussions. You have to allocate budgets and time to experiments. You have to require new products and innovative changes to the way you deliver service. You have to train your employees how to think like innovators. And then you have to measure and review innovative practices to ensure they're being implemented and you don't fall back into the habits of how can we do it cheaper. All right, so that's Gary. Let's now move on, and we're going to talk about Jack Daly. So Ryan, I know you attended Jack's presentation. Why don't you take us through that?
Great, thank you, David. Well, Jack Daly, he's as passionate as ever about sharing what it takes to build a world-class sales organization. And if you don't know Jack, the energy of a guy who's finished Ironman at age 64 was very well received at the end of a Wednesday that was really information-packed. So for Jack, there's two basic foundations to building a great sales force. The first is systems and processes. Essentially, identify what the best practices of top performers are, codify them, and build these practices into your sales process for all to follow if you expect to achieve sustainable growth. And the second is leverage. Once you've identified best practices of top performers, you need them focused on high payoff activities, or what he coins HPAs. Once you understand what someone's worth within your organization, you need to understand what their high payoff activities are to understand how they can make more money with less work. That's leverage. In sales, there's a lot of things that should be done, but it doesn't mean the salesperson should be doing them. If they're worth $100 an hour and a part-time assistant might make $10 or $15 an hour doing these tasks like entering information into CRM or list building or whatnot, then the math is very straightforward that it's beneficial to hire that assistant, and the math would be about $40,000 a year to the plus side for that rep to spend those 10 hours a week on high payoff activities. As Jack succinctly put it, if you don't have an assistant, you are the assistant. And next section, Jack spoke to vision. You can't build it if you don't know what it is. Once you know what it is that you want to build, you have to paint a picture that's compelling and that inspires your own people first. As a marketing firm, we often see at Haley that as companies struggle to differentiate their services in this landscape, their ability to tell their core story in a compelling way often becomes the greatest differentiator of them all. And he also spoke to culture. Companies with exceptional cultures, in short, really just crush those who don't in every category you can think of: revenue, growth, etc. He paints the picture of 4 legs to a sturdy chair for culture. First, recognition systems. You can't have enough recognition for success. And thinking of a salesperson's recognition just being their paycheck is dead wrong, but it really goes throughout the organization. Number 2, communication systems, keeping people focused on the most important and not just on the urgent things that interrupt our lives day to day. Number 3, personal and professional development, making sure that that roadmap is clear. And number 4, the empowerment process. Your people need to feel like they can make a decision, like they own the place, and you don't want to make your salespeople have to run home to get approval all the time. We can go to the next slide. Jack, he talked about also the importance of having key people in key roles, and he really drilled down into the sales manager role, since that position, it's both critical for growth, and it's one that is oftentimes, well, it continues to be the bottleneck for a lot of small companies who either make the mistake of having the CEO as the default sales manager, or they assign the top performing sales rep as a sales manager when they're completely different skill sets for coaching and developing. So Jack makes the point that sales managers really need to be focused on constantly building a bench of talent and coaching their salespeople. The importance of the recruiting aspect of it really can't be overstated. And Jack gave a great analogy. He gave the really prescient example, since Duke's made the Final Four, about how Duke remains a dominant player in college basketball. They're competitive year in and year out, and that's an environment where most A players, they don't even stay past their sophomore year. Many are one and done. So it's their commitment to tirelessly recruiting the best that puts them head and shoulders over most of the other programs on a consistent basis. And you talked about how finding a number one salesperson, that improves the top 50% of your team when you hire that person, and they also will bring other top performers with them. So you really have to make a commitment and be willing to allocate time that doesn't deliver immediate ROI, nurturing those relationships of folks that you want to work for you, but the payoff when, as he says, life happens and they're ready to make a move, these number ones make a huge impact when you bring them on board. And lastly, Jack reminds us that it takes 9 touches or communications before someone who's never heard of you before can actually say who you are and know who you are. So if the studies show that most salespeople are giving up after 4 or 5, how do you overcome that? You really need to have highly relevant content that's valuable to your audience. It can't just be interruptions about your company and your services. So content that's relevant to them and multiple ways to reach out to them. So, be active on industry groups on LinkedIn, write and share blog posts that attract target clients, find the key influencers in your industry, and really you also want to build direct marketing campaigns around the knowledge of your prospects so that you've got those multiple touches. So planning out those activities in writing and executing them religiously is really what you need to be successful in today's selling environment. Brad Bialy, I believe you're up next.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, one of my favorite presentations for the exec forum was presented by Jacob Morgan. And during this presentation, he talked about the future of work and really focused on the freelance space and where that's kind of headed for the next 5 or so years. Before I get into the 8 forces that enable freelance work and what Jacob really presented on, I want to present some numbers real quick. So, in his research, 23 million contingent workers are expected to join the workforce by 2017, or collectively. 83% of executives plan to increase freelance work. By 2018, online work is expected to surpass $5 billion. One of the, really eye-opening stats here is that the average millennial tenure is less than 3 years. So if you look around your office and you see people that might be nearing that time, it's time to really kind of rope them back in. But the fact that it's less than the average employee tenure is really eye-opening to me. David, if you want to hit the next slide for me, we could talk about the 8 forces that enable freelance work. And these are all presented again by Jacob Morgan. The first is globalization. Boundaries don't exist anymore. We can now work with whoever we want, sort of wherever we want. Delayed retirement. People aren't leaving the workforce and kind of just hanging it up. Instead, they're delaying that process and looking to more of a freelance work, places like Uber, where instead you can pick your own schedule, work on your time, and then kind of work when you feel it's right. Again, the decreasing employee tenure, that's enabling freelancers to do as they see fit, not staying in one career too long, but working at what works best for them. So maybe it's an Uber opportunity or another freelance opportunity. The fourth would be marketplaces and platforms emerging. Airbnb is another great freelance opportunity where you essentially open up your house and welcome in, I guess, strangers, but it was Inc.'s #1 company of 2014. And if you look up Airbnb, they actually have more listings online right now than Hilton Worldwide and Intercontinental Hotels Group. So it's really a game changer in terms of hotels, but it's a new platform that's emerging and really kind of disrupting things. Job instability. People feel that they're not in a stable environment, so they look to freelance. They look to their passions, and they start to act on those. The sixth force would be mobility and technology. In order to work now for many industries, all you have to do is connect. So you have to either get on your smartphone or your tablet, and you can check your email, or you can do your whole job right from wherever you are as long as you can connect to the internet. This is a great opportunity for the freelance environment. 7 would be decoupling employment and healthcare. With new healthcare advancements, you don't need to rely solely on your employer for that benefit. Instead, you can take out some healthcare on your own, and you can kind of decouple that. And that's great for freelancers because now they can take advantage of what they see fit. The last force that Jacob touched on was the freelance ecosystem. You know, there's a whole network to support freelancers. So you're not kind of on your own. You have a support system, and you can go after a freelance career, but do so in a organized way.
Thanks, Brian. I want to jump in on this presentation because a lot of people listening may be thinking, well, what does this have to do with the staffing industry? And Jacob was really talking about the incredible rise of the freelance worker. And right now, the staffing industry doesn't capture or capitalize on the explosive growth of the freelance marketplace. So you're seeing the online staffing companies, Odesk, Elance, and a host of others that are sort of getting into this market by matching worker with employer. But there are things they're not doing. When that freelancer really needs to have a W-2, those sites are just starting to get into that, but staffing companies may step in. There's also very few good systems for the employer to effectively manage their freelance workforce. And that may be another place that staffing companies could come in, more acting as an intermediary to match the freelancers and to manage the workflow than in traditional temp help. And again, it's about being innovative, and that's the reason that Jacob was the speaker. The executive forum was to get all of us thinking, how does this dramatic shift in the workforce impact us as either an opportunity or a threat? So Ryan, if you want to jump back in, and we're going to talk about, I think, one of everybody's favorite presentations, Ryan Estes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. And it's almost a shame this presentation from Ryan Estes had to wait until Thursday morning. I think he really connected in a way that I'm confident made a lot of subsequent interactions that day better from the perspective and the inspirational content he shared. He talked about how we're really on the cusp of a revolution in how customers make decisions, and presented 5 ideas to leverage to impact growth. The first was embrace continuous learning. And he quoted economist Tom Friedman's statement, think like an immigrant artisan. New immigrants are paranoid optimists. They know that they better figure out what's going on in the world around them and pursue it with more rigor than their neighbors. And he also challenged us to think like an artisan. Do your job every day with a pride that you would have, that you'd feel good about carving your initials into it. Secondly, talked about branding the customer experience. And to do this, you must offer compelling insight to educate your customer about something they didn't know and customize your offering to them. And he also mentioned controlling the outcome to protect your margins. So the goal, of course, is to not only grow your business, but turn your customers into evangelists for your services. And you can start that with your own employees. But the studies show that 75% of customers are willing to evangelize for your company, but fewer than 20% do. And imagine the opportunity that exists if you were to close that gap. Third, he talks about leading from a position of influence. And to do this, you have to start with really good two-way listening skills. Once you've got that down and you know how to listen to the people around you, you need to ask better questions. There's really nothing more powerful than that. And once you do that, then you can lead by going first. When you do this, everyone on your team knows what to expect from you. And he shared a great marketing lesson here, referencing the marketing guru Seth Godin. Business growth is about 2 things: getting referred and getting found. And perhaps the best way to be found these days is actually blog writing. To that, he shared Seth's insight. It doesn't matter if anyone reads it. What matters is the humility that comes from it. You want to force yourself to become part of the conversation and get out there. Number 4 is be a culture champion. When core values are understood, employees are 38 times more likely to be engaged in their work. And lastly, take action now. Ryan challenged everyone to focus on 3 main ideas to have an impact in the next 30 days. And that was really a great way to end on the last keynote, considering the tidal wave of information this year. So in getting back to the tidal wave, I think, David, we're ready for the session breakouts.
You got it. So next up, those were the keynote presentations. And again, it's hard to do justice to 5 hours of content in 20 minutes of our recap. But as you can see, lots of ideas, and from Ryan Estes, if everybody can pull 2 or 3 ideas out of today's session and think about things you'd try to do in your business, that's how you implement the best take-home value. Now we're going to move on to the breakout sessions, and Brad, if you want to jump in and get us started with creating winning corporate structures.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. This was an interesting session, and again, the overall theme of the conference was innovation. So this particular breakout session talked about how you go from that startup to a regional player, to a national player, to an international player, and really grow your business and evolve your business over time. And they introduced a concept called the Griner Curve. And what it did is walk through the different phases of your organization. So phase 1, they talked about growth through creativity. So again, that starts with a startup and goes to a small to medium-sized firm. And really, again, you're growing through creativity. You're trying new things. You're seeing what works, and you're seizing opportunity right then and there. And you can do that until you get to a point of what they call leadership crisis, where you get to a point where you've outgrown existing leadership. That often is when an entrepreneur no longer can be the CEO of the organization and maybe has to step aside to bring in some additional thought leadership. Phase 2, growth through direction. Okay, you get beyond that little leadership crisis, you bring in the right management, and you're growing through that leadership until you get to an issue with autonomy. Okay, so at what point do you need to bring in a board of governors or a board of directors for your firm to bring that outside insight, that outside influence in? And this growth is through delegation, through hearing others' input, acting on that, and then creating a team that can delegate and follow through on these. The next phase that we go through is growth through coordination. And often this comes into when you get into the branch or franchise model, and you need to coordinate things across a wide network of offices or individual management teams. And what happens here is you get this control crisis. When you have leadership teams in different areas throughout the country or throughout the world, you tend to lose a little bit of that control. So in this phase, you really need to sit back and make sure that you have the right management structure in place. Make sure that you have the right team in place that can really coordinate these things on a local level while still sticking with the overall corporate mission and corporate goal. From there, you move on to phase 5, which is growth through collaboration. And oftentimes, this is where you partner with other organizations, partner with other vendors, maybe look at the MSP model. Oftentimes, what happens here is that you run into red tape. So your organization is so big that you need so much input from different areas of the company and different leadership teams that often you can't act on the opportunities that you could way back in phase 1 when you're a startup. So you need to plan to get past that red tape, to be more efficient, be more innovative, and not be afraid to address those challenges. And then lastly, phase 6, which is growing through alliances. And really what happens here is often firms hit a plateau. They can't get to that next point. They can't grow anymore until they align with other organizations. Maybe there's mergers, there's acquisitions. Maybe the entire business model shifts and changes. So there's a growth crisis here. So wherever you are in this growth pattern, I think what the important takeaway here is to look at the challenges, look at the pitfalls in each growth phase, and think about what you need to do now to plan to get over that pitfall, get past that roadblock so that you can reach that next growth phase. David, if you want to go to the next slide, what was interesting here is the panel talked about the traditional growth of service lines. So again, the overall theme was innovation. And what often happens is that staffing and recruiting firms need to innovate, but what that looks like is growing their service lines. And this was just a generalization of what typically happens at different revenue levels. So in the $25 to $50 million range, when you get to that point, many are looking at master suppliers. So they're becoming a master supplier for organizations. From that 50 to about 250 million, most are getting into more advanced payroll processing and high volume. The next step is that MSP. So they're looking at that 250 to 500 million. Then they're moving on to strategic RPO. Okay, and this doesn't mean just basic RPO. This is really in-depth. You're going into an organization and you're managing their entire recruitment process. And then in that billion-plus mark, you're looking at HRO, IC compliance, HR consulting, really moving up that value chain and getting out of the traditional staffing business. What's interesting here is at the Staffing Executive Forum, you have the chance to talk with some of the leaders in the space, people that you would never be able to just pick up the phone and talk with. And I had the opportunity to have a very candid conversation with the CEO of a $1.1 billion organization. And he wasn't at this particular breakout, but stopped by our booth afterwards. And I said to him, you've grown exponentially for the past 10 years. What's been your secret? And he said, realizing when we need to bring in new leadership. And not just to replace old leadership, existing leadership, but he said he found that to get from 25 to 50 million, he had to bring in a different leader with a different mindset. To get to that 100 to 250 mark, he had to bring in other people. He had to bring in a board. To get to that 1 billion mark, he had to bring in other people that could look at things differently, that had an outsider's view, and that could lead the organization to that point. So I think the key takeaway there is, not that you're going to go from, entrepreneurship to 1 billion overnight, but thinking about what leadership you need in place to get past that pitfall is extremely important when you're trying to grow and when you're trying to innovate.
Great, thanks, Brad. All right, I'm going to take the next session, which is one I mentioned in the beginning, flexibility with fairness, which was the opposition viewpoint. This session that we had two very vocal individuals who are sort of rallying against the staffing industry. One was a guy named George Ganos from the Center for Labor Research at Florida International University, and the other was David DeSerio, who started a group called the Alliance for the American Temporary Workforce. They both are advocates for temporary workers. And I'm going to present now, here's a list of what they said were their issues with the staffing industry. They said that they see a lot of temp to perm abuses where the temporary employees are not given any sort of a timeline, guidance, no guarantee on how they can go from being a temp to getting a full-time job. And also that they're getting lower pay than their permanent counterparts, and that they're seeing hard work not being rewarded for people in temp to perm situations, kind of like this carrot dangled out in front of the worker that's never attainable. They were citing a lack of equal pay for equal work, that temps make an average of 20% less according to their data. The next one I'm sort of laughing at because they mentioned that there were high markups and low pay rates. Now, one of the eye-opening things to me was that A, these people had some legitimate gripes, and B, they had some really big misconceptions. One of the two presenters talked about the fact that they see staffing firms charging 300% markups, but paying their employees very low rates of pay. And I'm sure anybody on today's call would absolutely love a 300% markup. But what was interesting is that's the perception of the worker. That's the perception of an educator. That's probably the perception of some employers and government officials. They don't really understand the economics of our business, and they assume incorrectly that you're making these piles and piles of money on the backs of people who are being treated poorly. The next one's a very legitimate concern, wage theft. Organizations and some disreputable staffing firms that have minimum wage violations, or what they'll do is they'll pay minimum wage and then they'll charge for transportation and check cashing and sometimes even housing, so that the people are making less than minimum wage. And then they also have people working overtime without being paid for overtime. Those practices are illegal, but they are practices that exist in the staffing industry, and the people who are posting negative things and talking to legislators about negative things are pointing to these disreputable operators as an example of the staffing industry as a whole. They also pointed to discrimination in all facets, a denial of basic information about things like the pay rate, the expected job duties, the hazards on the job, required clothing, tools, or skills. There are a lot of temporary employees that just don't know what you expect. And this is one of the eye-openers to me, is that these temporary employees, particularly lower-level workers, sometimes don't understand the most basic things. They don't know what they're being paid per hour. They don't know what they should do if the employer asks them to do something that you never told them about. The people on this board were both talking about an incident in which a temporary employee was killed. He was in a palletizing plant. He was asked to go under a piece of equipment and clean out some debris. His supervisor had turned off the equipment. Well, while he was under there, somebody else walked in, saw the equipment was off, and turned it on. Didn't follow any of the organization's safety procedures. Really wasn't anything to do with the staffing company, but someone died. And it was because, one, the employer had very bad safety practices. Two, the employee should never have been asked to go into that equipment and didn't know what to do when he was asked to do something outside the expected range of duties. Their next complaint was barriers to direct employment, and they believed it's time for an end to conversion fees. Not sure I agree with that one, but they believed your conversion fees somehow prevent them from getting full-time jobs. And then they were just complaining in general about a host of health and safety issues. What was interesting to me about this panel was how they viewed the staffing industry, and they were generalizing from the worst players in the industry, the ones who aren't at the executive forum, who don't join the American Staffing Association, who don't abide by the industry's code of ethics, the ones who compete with you the most on price because they're doing things that are unethical. And these organizations actually could be a blessing to the staffing industry because they said, and these individuals said, we maintain lists of firms that are reputable employers and firms that are disreputable. And they, as outsiders, can't tell the difference between one and another, and they're looking to hear from good staffing organizations about what are the best practices, what should firms be doing. And there's an opportunity for individual companies and our industry as a whole to have an outreach with these organizations to raise the standard of performance for the industry, to demonstrate that good employers, good staffing firms do things differently, and employers have to expect there's got to be fair pay for better service. So the American Staffing Association, Richard Wahlquist was there in attendance, and he personally said he was going to sit down with these individuals and work on improving relationships with the people who are opponents of staffing, and ultimately that should benefit everybody on today's call who represent firms that are really committed to high ethical standards and high performance, and help dissuade these organizations from painting this negative picture of every single staffing firm based on the actions of the worst players. All right, Ryan, let's talk about some new strategies for information technology staffing.
Sure, thanks, David. And this is one of the great benefits at Exec Forum. You get these different perspectives where companies open up and share exactly how they're approaching today's market. And this year's session for IT staffing, it showcased how 4 of them have shifted their strategies to align with the opportunities of a market enjoying strong secular growth. So, we talked about staffing being cyclical, but IT growth is projected another 7% in 2015. So first up was Ross Fernandez from Q Analyst, and they started as a QA and software testing firm in 2003, and they ventured into VMS while still maintaining that specialization. But over time, they got into BI and business analytics, and they started recognizing that their VMS business really wasn't aligned with their evolving vision of who they were and what they wanted to focus their business on. So last year, they, quote-unquote, ripped off the Band-Aid, as Ross said, and courageously fired all 11 VMS accounts they serviced. And Ross explained how this tremendous change is now finally starting to be rewarded, painful at first, but they've doubled down on their dedication to quality assurance and business analytics, where their core competencies offer the greatest value. And so now their $30 million in revenue is higher margin, it's value-added business, and they have a well-defined culture. We've been talking about culture, and it's not fragmented or diluted by the VMS requirements. Everyone there knows who they are and what value they provide to their clients. Second up was Pat Patel from IntelliSwift. They migrated their company's approach from Touchpoint to a VMS model. So in contrast to the first one, and Pat really focused in his presentation how critical their 18 months of experimentation was up front and the investment that required over that time. And it was that long, it was 18 months before they saw any ROI from the changes they brought about. But they tried RPO, they tried hiring inexperienced recruiters to handle volume, they tried co-employment with vendors. None of those things worked. But born from that experimentation was a model that requires a delivery manager on site, implementing an ATS, critical for them, striving to be a top 5 vendor within the first 2 quarters and creating a compliance team. And they manage internal scorecards, leverage technology to automate tasks, and they built a global recruiting team to serve the DMS space. So this is his equation here for success in their market. And lastly, Gene Holtzman from Mitchell Martin. He shared his firm's 30-year history, and they were founded to focus on the tech needs of the financial services industry in New York City. Gene was actually a social worker until he was 30, and he had a philanthropic drive to help young entrepreneurs. That helps to kind of understand his vision for creating an incubator named Talent Tech Labs. So at Mitchell Martin, they were early adopters of technologies from ATS to VMS, one of the first ATSs with JobDiva, and he saw all these ecosystems that inspired him to create an incubator that was completely separate from Mitchell Martin. And the goal of it is to provide thought leadership for its participants and offer a front row seat on implementing cutting-edge technology solutions. So, this group, they collaborate with other staffing firms to advance the field. And I'd encourage you to Google Talent Tech Labs just to kind of see the roadmap they offer to the industry to clear up all the clutter that over 800 companies in this ecosystem create. It can be really overwhelming, but their insights on where the most promising technologies lie are ones that you might be unaware of, and really puts things in perspective. David, I think it's back to you.
Thanks. One of the breakouts I attended was called Creating a Talent Brand. And just some quick data from that. 68% of firms say that brand impacts recruiting, but only 33% do anything about it. And what was interesting about the talent brand is the fact that from a candidate perspective, 76%, 3/4 of your candidates say your company's website is their preferred channel of communication. So that's your opportunity to differentiate. Does your website stand out from the competition? Does your website create a great brand in terms of how you present your organization and how you present your jobs? But it's not just about a pretty site. You need great jobs. You need to represent top local employers and have great pay, great opportunities. You need a quick and easy application process so that it's not tedious, so they don't run to somebody else. You need to get your jobs found through search engine optimization, social media, email, and texting. You need to deliver a better experience for the candidate, and this is both on your website and offline. And then lastly, and this kind of a recurring theme from recruiting, is you need to think about how can we be a best place to work for talent in our marketplace, because if you can do those things and create a talent brand, you lower your recruiting costs, you attract higher caliber talent, and you're able to fill your clients' job orders faster with better people. All right, and then jumping on. This is the panel I sat on, which says New Marketing Strategies for a New Era. But since I was on the panel, I didn't take any notes. So, Brad, you want to help figure out what we said?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna. If you want to stay on the line, David, if you want to touch on the first two afterwards, that'd be great to get the panelist input on that as well. But in terms of new ideas for social media, sitting in the room, there was some great conversation on Net Promoter Score and how to take advantage of your online reputation. And that's something that I took a lot of notes on. Again, just being an observer. A lot of the attendees were interested on how they can really take hold and take advantage of their online reputation and use it to their advantage. So using things like reputation management and using Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn, Google+, listening to what your audience is saying and then having that conversation. If things aren't going right, finding out why and how to address them, making them better. Or just using your online social media platforms to educate your audience and grow that. The second point here, integrated sales and marketing. Using marketing to offer some sort of support to your sales team. So getting marketing involved with the sales process, having your sales team share blog posts or share good content, good quality content. Again, tying the two together so that your cold calls kind of turn into more of a warmer call. And again, David, if you wanted to come back in and kind of give that panelist input on that as well.
Yeah, sure. When we started to talk about creating differentiation, and each of the panelists was asked to present the one-line statement of what makes your firm unique. And what I thought was interesting is it really wasn't about product differentiation because everybody provides similar services. It was, most of the differentiation was around core values and something they valued in terms of how they treat the candidate or the client. It wasn't just about better quality or faster speed, but it was really based around a value of their organizationals and or finding a way to create a more managed, exceptional experience for the client or candidate. And really the opportunities for differentiation in any service business have to do with finding some aspect, breaking down your services in some way so that you can excel in areas that are true to your beliefs, you can consistently do it, but at the same time really make your overall service stand out because of where you've chosen to focus. In terms of recruitment marketing, in the 30 seconds I've got, I can't do justice to the conversation, but a lot of the discussion was about the product you offer as an employer. Do you have the best jobs? Are you offering a better product to the candidate? And then once you have that better product, are you doing a better job communicating with people in the most efficient, from both a time and cost perspective, ways possible, whether that's through how you're promoting your jobs in your job descriptions, the headlines you're using so they stand out on your job board, on other job boards, on job integrator sites, using SEO and job aggregators more efficiently, and then developing a deeper talent community so that you can get more referrals and you can do a better job keeping your employees placed. And somebody asked me the question, what's more important right now in dealing with recruiting or dealing with job orders? And I said, well, it's always both. But right now in a candidate-starved market, you need more job orders because every qualified candidate you have or that you find, you need to have a home for them or somebody else will. And every candidate you have that's coming off assignment, if you don't have the next job for that superstar, somebody else will. So even though we've got these dire talent shortages in certain areas, you still need to be developing job orders. And I apologize, we have to rush this one, but we've only got about 5 minutes left and we've got 2 more presentations to cover. So guys, let's talk about the App Academy.
Yeah, the App Academy, it was a great session. Essentially, it's a revolutionary approach to reducing student debt, as I worded it. It takes students that want to become software developers. They come into this 12-week course, and at the end of 12 weeks, they learn, a solid foundation of knowledge so that they can enter the workforce and essentially, increase not only their salary, but also increase their knowledge in development. So it's taking students that, had prior to the course a little bit of knowledge on development, really putting them through this rigorous training process so that at the end of 12 weeks they come out benefiting from all this learning. I know that Brad Smith was going to hop on as well and kind of talk about it, and David, you had mentioned we're running short on time here, so I'll pass it over to Brad here.
Yeah, what was really interesting in this session was that I see this relating very closely to staffing companies. So App Academy, their core business was education. As Brad mentioned, they looked to change how education was done and how students paid for education. But they launched a staffing side out of the business, out of necessity. So they needed a place to place these graduates, and they said, we can do it on our own and make some additional money. So what they're getting, similar to you, is a 20% direct placement fee on their graduates. But what's different is their graduates are also paying for tuition. So on top of that 20%, they're getting, I want to say they said 16 to 20% back from the student of first-year salary. So their effective direct hire placement rate is 35 to 40% of first-year salary. It's amazing. And what's great is they place 98% of graduates within 6 months. So if you do the math there, they're getting roughly 40 people through this course every 12 weeks. They have a 20% placement fee, and they have a 98% fill ratio. You can do the math quickly there. Very, very lucrative. So what it pertains really closely to staffing companies in a talent-starved market. They're creating their own talent. They're training these people, and they're placing 98% of them. And they're working with their hiring partners. So they're working with the end employer and saying to the end employer, what skills do you need, what skills are in demand, and if I can give you somebody with those skills, will you hire them right away? So hiring partners are crafting the curriculum. They're reaching back out to past graduates to find out what skills they're using now and what skills they're being asked to learn, so they're crafting training for the next 6 months, 2 years. And again, what they've done is created their own talent pool and pretty much have the highest placement ratio that I've ever seen in direct hire. So it's a great, great model.
All right, Brad, let's wrap things up with our last presentation, 20 big ideas from John Osborne.
You've got it. So John Osborne, analyst with Staffing Industry Analyst, does this session each year, and it's one of my favorites. So he goes through 20 big ideas and 20 opportunities for staffing companies. And as you see here, I don't have 20 here, and it's a good thing because we don't have time. So I picked out some of the ones that I thought were most interesting. And the first was the single most underserved big skill shortage area. It's not nurses, it's not IT professionals, it's not engineers, it's farm managers. As crazy as that sounds, farm managers, people, younger millennials aren't going into this. It's a very big area. There's 1.6% unemployment. There's 1 million people, and it's a aging workforce without a backup. So it's a great opportunity. Now, I'm not saying to go out and get into farm management, but what I am saying is look at other underserved markets. There's a lot of them out there, and there's a lot of big opportunity there for you, whether you're creating your own workforce through a training model or you're really efficient at recruiting hard-to-find skill set areas. Seek those out, and there's some big opportunity there. Another one is education. It's the fastest growing temp segment. There's 50% year-over-year growth, and according to John's analysis, it's a $3.8 billion in untapped market potential. So there's only a 17% penetration rate and $3.8 billion in spend that's sitting there on the table that's waiting for somebody to claim it. Construction is another high growth area. It's coming back. According to John, is the third best long-term job outlook. We've seen the big construction companies. There's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, so most of the growth is in the big players, but they're starting to see small and medium-sized players begin to grow too. Another suggestion was to move up the value chain, and it's been mentioned in a few presentations. But if you could look at statement of work, project-based work, outsourcing entire functions for companies, you move up the value chain, get away from that commodity pressure. Another one, David hinted at this earlier, is to look at changing your value proposition. Most staffing companies, their value proposition is all about the relationship. Okay, we take a one-to-one approach to our relationship. We build great relationships. We provide great service. What staffing industry analysts and other researchers found was that companies don't care. They care about worker quality. Okay, so focus on worker quality first, relationship second. Make your website candidate-centric. This was a biggie. What they did is they went out and surveyed people to find out how successful their website was at generating sales and return on investment. And what they found is that the most successful websites out there were all in the healthcare space. And what's interesting was that the healthcare websites are all candidate-focused. Very little on the clients. I'm not saying ignore your clients, but they are more candidate-centric. They had job board. They had value propositions for candidates, and there was a recruiting focus. Those sites had the highest ROI. The lowest ROI was in the IT space, in which they're all focused on the client. So look at what you can do to make your website more attractive to candidates. Go beyond recruiting and create a skills school. Doesn't have to be coders. It could be welding, trucking, medical coding, whatever. Train your workforce. If you can't find workers, train them. And then the last, invest in internal staff. As you all know, there's high turnover in our industry. And what they found was that turnover was due to bad management and bad environments. So look at those two areas, see what you can do to improve, and your firm will be stronger because of it.
Great, thanks, Brad. All right, guys, we have reached the final top 10 list, which are our take-home lessons. I know we're a couple minutes over. We've got just a few minutes to go, so appreciate everybody sticking with us as we run through our top 10 lessons learned. And I'll kick things off. This was one of my take-homes from the dissenter panel, and that we're not doing a good enough job as an industry communicating with our talent. So we have to make sure we're clear about job expectations, simple things like what are you going to be paid, who's the supervisor, what to do when you're assigned a task that you don't think you should be doing. What we're doing for you as a staffing firm to help you get ahead and succeed. We need to find ways to communicate more effectively with the talent. That gives them a better experience, which in turn helps strengthen the industry as a whole. Second lesson learned for me was event marketing really works if you have a great game plan. Now this is more of a personal story about Haley Marketing Group. We went to the executive forum this year with a really good game plan. We didn't just show up and try to network. We didn't just do one email blast like most other vendors did. we had a very strategic plan. We did targeted mailings to a small group of people we really wanted to meet with in advance of the conference. We connected with everybody at the conference on LinkedIn ahead of time. I think I added 170 new contacts on LinkedIn. Sent personal one-to-one follow-up emails to everybody who connected to me on LinkedIn. We developed a curriculum of professional social messages and scheduled them all in advance. So throughout the conference, we were the most active on Twitter while we didn't even have to do anything because it was already planned in advance. We designed a great booth to try to generate traction for our services. We then focused on dominating live tweeting while we were at events. We did targeted direct mail follow-up to those same people we mailed ahead of time. We did bulk email follow-up to everybody, and now you're on our recap webinar, which kind of winds down what we did for marketing. That game plan enabled this to probably be one of our most successful conferences ever, and in your business, if you go to trade events, they work really well if you have a great strategy before you go.
Thanks, David. This lesson was actually from a panel I attended that was 4 of the largest light industrial players in the United States. And what they talked about was looking at blue-collar workers and helping them market themselves better. So that might be providing training, that might be helping with resume, that might be helping with other areas, but making sure that they know how to market themselves more effectively. It can lead to increased placement rates. They also mentioned that there's been a higher percentage of contingent labor used in the market than ever before, and what's great about this is that productivity is at an all-time high. It's a really compelling story, and as an industry, we have to tell that story. More contingent labor is leading to higher productivity, lower risk, lower overall cost. So it's a really compelling story that can help propel the light industrial staffing area. And then last, we've heard it a few times from a few different speakers, but starting a skills school was one of the best recruitment activities they've ever done. And this particular person started a truck driving skills school. And again, they're placing everybody that graduates from the school. It's a great way to create a talent market when there's a shortage. And then moving on, I mentioned earlier, look at underserved markets and generate your own talent pool. Education is one, welding, skilled trades. There are a lot of underserved markets. Look at staffing industry analysts' data. You can easily find which areas are underserved, and if you can, create a solution in those areas. It can be a very profitable business for you.
Thanks, Brad. All right, Ryan, how about some take-homes from you?
Great. Well, one I want to share here quickly, since I heard it come up in multiple sessions, concerns seem to be mounting if you compete for a statement of work business. I've shared multiple times that folks are seeing staff augmentation masquerading as SOW work. So the importance is greater than ever to really make sure that statement of work business is more well-defined and that staff aug has its own budget so that, and that's only fair for both the staffing firms competing on the business and for the client and their satisfaction going forward. So that was a big takeaway from 3 of the sessions that it came up in. And then next is another one from Ryan Estes, which is on the next slide here. If average is over. Those days are gone. The market is too mature and too competitive. And so if you aren't so proud of your work that you carve your initials into it, there won't be seats at the table for you in the future. You're never going to get referred. You're never going to get found without having innovative insights and really superior solutions. And then your core messaging can really reflect that unique story.
Terrific. Thanks, Ryan. All right, Brad, a couple from you.
Yeah, my first one was to be aware and also beware of the freelance economy. So not only see it as a threat, but also see it as an opportunity for your organization. The freelance economy is growing, and just take note of that and use it to your knowledge. My next point kind of ties in with Ryan's and the Ryan Estes approach, but decide how you show up. And this is kind of on a personal and also a company level. Be the best version of you, the graphic that we put with this, whether it's a meeting or a presentation or, just showing up to work every day. But making sure that you're the best version of you and deciding how you want to show up and living up to that was probably my main takeaway from the exec forum. If you want to slide to the next one. And my third lesson learned was, instead of focusing on how to be successful, think of how you can be helpful. Don't, go day to day thinking about how you can be a success story, but instead think about how you can help others and let success fall into place.
Thanks, Brad. And I'll wrap things up with one last one. And Brad's probably going to blush at this one. But rookies can bring awesome ideas to your firm if you give them a chance. I would say we've been going to the Staffing Industry Executive Forum for 8 or 9 years now. This was far and away our most successful event. And most of the strategy for what we did with our social media was entirely thanks to Brad coming up with the idea of what we should do in advance, designing the thought process, and he didn't actually do the design work, but designing the thought process behind the graphics you see on the screen so that every hour during the conference, Haley Marketing had a big presence. He also had the idea of getting the conference attendee list, downloading that, and then uploading it into LinkedIn so that we could connect with more participants. And overall, a lot of our success came from getting Brad involved with the strategy for Haley Marketing Group. So great take-home lesson is get ideas from everybody on the team because they can make an awesome impact on your success. All right. I would say any questions. We'll stay on the call if anybody wants to stay on. You can use the chat window. We're over time, so thank you to everybody who has participated. But since we're out of time, feel free to pick up the phone and call us. Send an email to info@ or reach out to us on Twitter or Facebook, and we'll be more than happy to answer any of your follow-up questions. And just to let you know also, we have another event coming up in just a few weeks. We have been talking a little bit about websites on today's call. We've been doing a ton on websites in recent months and actually the last 2 years to kind of really radically change how we're developing our sites. And we're going to get Haley Marketing Group's creative team, along with me, on the line to talk about how to create a killer staffing website, really all the new lessons for 2015 based on what we've seen and some of the realities of what we find in analyzing Google Analytics for more than 500 staffing websites. So that's coming up in just a few weeks. And for today, thank you from all of us for participating in today's Lunch with Haley event.